Welcome to the Pulaski County Tourism Bureau's audio tour of Pulaski County Route 66. I am your guide, Terry Primus. This audio tour is intended only for tourists exploring Route 66 on their own, in or on their own vehicles. This is not intended for a tour bus, as there are places visited where a bus cannot go and cannot turn around. To begin the tour, take exit 169 on Interstate 44 and then go south on Highway J 1/10 of a mile to Highway Z and turn west or right. Stop at the 35-mile-per-hour curve sign almost immediately after turning on Highway Z. The shoulder's a little wider there. Reset your odometer to 0.0. Welcome to Pulaski County, or almost Pulaski County. The county line is a couple of hundred yards ahead. This tour section will cover a bit more than 15 miles of Route 66 in eastern Pulaski County, from here to the park at Ruby Dew Spring in downtown Waynesville. Counting this one, we will make 15 informational stops where I will tell you some history of the adjacent roadside. A link to vintage images of the sites is on the Pulaski County Tourism Bureau's website. Route 66 was commissioned as a federal highway in 1926. It wasn't a newly constructed highway, but a collection of pre-existing roads linked together from Chicago, Illinois to Santa Monica, California, for a length of more than 2,400 miles. Missouri's State Highway 14, which ran through Pulaski County, became Route 66. The 33 miles in Pulaski County boasts some great old and what we call new pavement from several alignments of Route 66. This area of the original road, from just the other side of the overpass to a little community 2 miles west called Hooker, was dubbed Basketville and shown on tourist maps as a basket-making area. The area became widely known for the local handicraft of white oak basket making as well as stools and chairs. William F. Childers apparently started the cottage industry along the road. Mr. Childers was living in Cabool, Missouri, in southern Texas County, when he heard of the new road to the north. Things were already depressed in the Ozarks even before the Depression, but the road held out promise of more tourist customers for Mr. Childers' specialty. The family came north to western Phelps County in, I kid you not, a covered wagon. William F. and his son, Henry Jasper, established their Artful Woodworks craft shop, a log building, proclaiming the crafts were made by Ozark hillbillies, an almost irresistible come-on to the beginning stream of city tourists. The Childers were joined and followed by other local artisans such as George Miller and Clarence and Raymond Wells. Roadside stands hugged the shoulder, offering their baskets, straight-back chairs, and footstools. We are going to proceed west on this blacktop stretch and, for a short distance, will travel the 1942 divided 4-lane before turning onto what most tourists speed on by, the original 1926 gravel Route 66. Drive your vehicle until .9 shows on the odometer and turn onto Trout Lane. It will be the second turn on your right, the first being an uphill driveway, so don't turn in there. Turn onto the gravel road at .9 miles, stop under the first tree, and turn me on again. Stop 2, 0.9 miles. In 1926, the 306-mile Missouri stretch from St. Louis to Joplin was a mixture of graded earth and gravel, with only about 30 miles or less of concrete pavement on its St. Louis end. This is what the first travelers on the Main Street of America saw in Pulaski County. A gravel road, maybe 16 feet wide, with a dolomite bluff on one side, and, you might have to look closely through the vegetation, Hooker Creek on the left side, which, by the way, can really get to ripping in a frog-strangling rain and come up and cover the road. In 1926, it still must have been close passing from opposite directions for two Model Ts, and have to be careful not to hit the side mirrors and bust them off. In that year, a Ford Model T cost $400, and gas cost 10 cents a gallon. But remember, here in the Ozarks, 10 cents was also the prevailing hourly wage in 1926. Turn me off and travel to mile 1.1. Stop 3, 1.1 miles. We have passed two small residences and now are opposite a small blue-sided cabin. This flat ground on the north side of the road was the site of the first tourist camp on this stretch of the road. It was named Springvale, and not much is left now. Only a little stonework, and no picture survives that we know of. Charlotte Sheldon Smith, born on a farm near here, described Springvale as locally quite famous for its dance hall and 4 cabins. They were 2 and 3 rooms that were much in demand during World War II. There was a drilled well with a hand pump, several tall walnut trees, and lots of nice grass with plenty of room for camping. There were 2 little houses way back. One had a moon cut out on the door. The other had a sun cut out on it. We paused here, and I thought I'd give you a chance just to imagine that scene and that first resort on this part of the road. That blue-sided cabin, little building there, is one of the surviving structures. We are now going to go to stop 3 at mile 1.4. Stay on the gravel, even though you will come within a few feet of the 1942 concrete pavement. Stay on the gravel, and you will angle away from the pavement and stop at 1.4 miles between a white house with a brown metal roof with 2 storage buildings close to the road and a gray house with a white and red trim mobile home in front of it. Stop at the big vacant lot between those 2 residences. Turn me off now. Stop 4, mile 1.4. At this spot were 2 roadside stores, side by side. Just a bit behind us, on the ground held by the native stone retaining wall from the 1930s, was Charlie Ray's store and resort. Ray's had a 3-room building with a store in the middle room. The east end was a bedroom and the west end was the kitchen. The souvenir shop was a separate building, octagonal shape, with a large overhang. There were also 3 nice cabins and a camping area. Charlie Ray also operated a city service filling station and garage with a dugout car service pit. It was also a free-range chicken area, too, which may or may not have delighted the city folks. Just west, where the gray house and white trailer with red trim, to over near the group of cedars, that was the location of Gann's gift shop. The rather small, steep roof building's walls lifted up to display pottery and baskets. Large signs advertising stools and chairs for 50 cents in the late 30s brought urban customers even during the Depression years. Business didn't fall off much here in the Ozarks on the road for the handicrafts. Along the roadside, additional block and board racks displayed more pottery, with baskets hanging from arbor-like constructions. The two businesses were right next to each other, and the local story is that Charlie Ray erected a wooden wall, kind of like a billboard, but with no advertising on it, between his place and Gann's, so that when you came down the narrow road, you couldn't see Gann's gift shop. Of course, that would only work if the customer was coming from the east. If he was coming from the west, he wouldn't be able to see Ray's place. But I guess that most of the traffic was westbound from St. Louis, and Charlie figured it would pay off. Caused a little bad blood, though. We are now going to go on for a short distance of 0.2 of a mile to a stop sign at the edge of the 4-lane. We will be across from a rather new-looking log-sided structure, well, actually 2 structures. I'll tell you about that site later. Go on to the 4-lane concrete for a very short distance and turn right back onto the gravel before the canoe rental sign that's painted on a canoe. You will be on Trophy Lane. Turn me off and follow those directions to mile 1.8 on your odometer. You'll be opposite a neat white-sided house with a stone foundation and a 2-story stone chimney. I'll be waiting there for you. Stop 5, mile 1.8. I have heard several stories about the house on the right, that it was a roadhouse during the late 30s and early 40s, and a rather bawdy roadhouse at that. However, the storyteller usually has a disclaimer of, somebody told me that, a second or third hand account, so I can't say for sure. Can't get anybody or find anybody who admits to any first-hand knowledge of any of the goings-on. Now, start up, and we're going to travel on west to 1.9 miles, just 1/10 of a mile down the road. And just go ahead and leave me on. Notice that Hooker Creek is back on our left. In fact, it's a little bigger creek now. Coming up on our left is a very nice native stone building. Small, but an excellent example of Ozark stone architecture. Creep on by the driveway. The front of the house is pretty much hidden by a hedge in the summer. Pull a little past the house and past the hedge, across from a grape arbor built on an old foundation, so that you can see the native stone house over your left shoulder. This is the house of probably the most famous basket maker in Pulaski County at the time, Clarence Wells. Clarence and his wife Ruth made baskets, and their workshop was this yard right in front of us, well, to our left. They would be weaving baskets as customers from the city came along, looking for that hillbilly souvenir and that goodbye. The story in the family is that no one had a pattern for any particular basket. They could just feel how a basket should be made. But it seems that Clarence and Ruth made 38 styles of baskets. When a towel company contacted Clarence about making 3,000 small baskets with no handles, he was up to the task, but needed some help. Wife Ruth and brother Raymond and his wife Alice, who were also basket makers, helped Clarence with one of the biggest basket orders he ever had. The baskets were to go to the 1939 World's Fair in New York. The towel company put 2 washcloths in each basket, and they were sold as souvenirs at the fair. The weavers got 10 cents for each basket. Proceed now another 1/10 of a mile, and you will see a well-maintained school and church building at the entrance to the Hooker Cemetery. Pull into the cemetery parking lot on the right. We'll pause there a few minutes before turning around. The odometer should read 2.0 miles when you stop. Turn me off until you're in the parking lot and ready to resume. Stop 6, mile 2.0. This well-maintained building was once the elementary school of the Hooker community. The community got its name from J. L. Hooker, a local landowner and fishing and hunting guide. The school was originally on the other side of the gravel road. When the 4-lane was built in 1942, which you can see through the trees, the community moved the school building out of the way and across the original 66 gravel road to its present location. There had also been a one-room high school next to the elementary school, and it was cited in 1929 by the St. Louis Globe-Democrat as the smallest high school in Missouri. This gravel road is going around the north end of a big ridge, Hooker Ridge as a matter of fact. However, part of original Route 66 was destroyed by construction of an I-44 overpass, and it's no longer passable. You can no longer go all the way on the gravel road. There were quite a few Hooker business enterprises on that gravel for the next mile or so. A few hundred yards on the left was Wells Station. Started by Squire Wells, it established a Wells family present on Route 66 that lasted as long as the commissioned highway. There was a grocery store, campground, and cabins at Wells Station. It was the hangout place for the local kids. There is a Wells family story about how they got into business on Route 66. Squire and Anna Wells' house was right next to where Route 66 forded Hooker Creek. You had to drive through the creek. Of course, the creek, could be, dry a lot of the time. So Squire went downstream and he built a dam, and he dammed up Hooker Creek so that it would almost all the time be flooding over, that gravel and dirt Route 66. In fact, he probably even added a little dirt to it to make a nice muddy mess. Well, anyway, when the Flatlanders, and by the way, that's what the Ozarkers here in the Wells family, called the tourists, Flatlanders, whenever they'd come down the road and then they'd try to ford the creek in their old tees, well, they'd get stuck. And they'd push, but they couldn't get it going, and they'd look around, and they'd see Squire, sitting on his porch, puffing on a corncob pipe, and they'd ask, gee, mister, could you help us, get our car out of this mud hole? And he'd probably say, yep, but my mule needs to eat. And he'd charge him $1 to pull him out of the mud hole that, of course, he made. And that's how the Wells family got started in business on Route 66. Across from Wells Station was Gray's blacksmith shop. People said if Mr. Gray couldn't fix it, he would just make you a new one. Next on the left was Fancher's Grocery, campground, souvenirs, and post office. Fancher's had a substantial concrete building that lasted until the I-44 construction dozed it in the late 70s. Across the road was Odell's, remembered to have a fair-sized roadside zoo, which is really unusual around here. Later, the Beckers sold chairs, stools, and baskets that they had made in the old Odell building. And here a road went north to the mouth of the Big Piney. There were summer vacation cabins on this short stretch of the country road along the river. Out in the field at the end of the big ridge that the road skirted was Barton's Valley View store. It was built out of small stones instead of, the big field stones. These were like cobblestones. And its sides were covered with ivy. Across the road was a nice spring, and they piped water through a culvert into a rocked basin. People traveling Route 66 would fill up their water jugs and water coolers at Barton's Valley View store. They also had a counter inside serving soda, ice cream, or a bologna sandwich. That was also popular with the locals, too. There were 3 tourist cabins for rent. Around on the west side of the ridge was the Calvary Baptist Church. And finally, at the farthest west end of the community of Hooker, was Burgard's Sunset Rest Resort, located at what would become an intersection of the original gravel Route 66 and the 1942 4-lane. Cabins, groceries, and gasoline were available. We're going to see this site in a little while. Pictures of most of these early roadside businesses that I just mentioned and briefly described are available on the companion website. Now, it's time for us to turn around here in the parking lot and head back east to the stop sign at the 4-lane. Turn right before the canoe rental sign and stop at the stop sign at the edge of the concrete pavement. The log-sided building that we actually saw before will be 100 yards to your left, and your odometer should be on 2.3 miles. Turn me off and then on again when you get to the edge of the 4-lane Route 66. Stop 7, mile 2.3. Shortly we are going to leave this original 1926 Route 66 in the dust. As I said before, most tourists speed by on the 4-lane ahead and never experience the original road through Hooker. And that was the intention of this stretch of 4-lane in 1942, to increase and speed up the traffic and bypass Hooker. When Route 66 was commissioned in 1926, only about 800 miles were paved from Chicago to Santa Monica, California. Paving the remaining 1,648 miles was not accomplished until 1937. However, paving was completed of the 2-lane route through Pulaski County by 1930. Divided 4-lane construction and alterations to the old road were started in 1942, and that was brought on by the construction of nearby Fort Leonard Wood in 1941. 32,000 construction workers had descended on this rural area of the northern Ozarks to construct a training installation for the U.S. Army on the brink of World War II. With the fort completed in 1941, the winding Route 66 and the narrow bridge at Devil's Elbow over the Big Piney River that we're going to see, just east of the installation, those two things became an obstacle in moving large equipment to and from the fort. So a very ambitious project was undertaken to relieve the traffic congestion heading to Fort Leonard Wood that snarled the highway. A dual-lane highway would straighten and shorten the route through Hooker. It would also bypass that narrow bridge with its dogleg approach, which made it even worse. It would also eliminate the curvy, steep hill coming out of Devil's Elbow. Only one thing stood in the way: the high ridge that the old road had snaked around, Hooker Ridge. Engineers decided to cut through the middle of the dolomitic limestone obstacle, and that created the famous Hooker Cut, one of the most photographed scenes on the highway. Let me describe this great road project now before we drive through it, because as we're driving there's not enough time. Let's take just a minute or so. Hooker Cut is not just another pretty view, but was groundbreaking engineering in road construction. Where the original road followed the contours of the rugged Ozark terrain, the cut sliced right through the ridge. But it required new techniques. Steam-powered drills penetrated the limestone, leaving fissure holes that were packed with dynamite, and the mountain was blown apart. 186,000 cubic yards of rock, weighing about 300,000 tons, were moved to be used for fill on other parts of the road. The depth of the cut was and is 93 feet. To prevent rocks from falling from the top and hitting vehicles, terracing was employed for the very first time. For each 30 feet of vertical wall, a 15-foot bench was cut horizontally to the road. A falling rock high on the cut would then hit the bench below. The original road was only 19 feet wide, with the bridge over the Piney having only a 12-foot clearance. So it wasn't going to be very big trucks, particularly the ones hauling bombers out to Kansas to have engines put in them. The width of the new cut, the new road, it's 86 feet. To accommodate the growing size of vehicles, the pavement was 22 feet wide on either side, with two 11-feet lanes. This 4-lane, with traffic traveling in different directions, required another innovation, which is very common to us today, the median strip. Additionally, the beveled curve was designed to direct rainwater toward gutters. When completed, it became the deepest road cut in Missouri, and possibly the entire country in the mid-1940s. It was one of the first 4-lane projects on 66 and the first in Missouri. Hooker Cut innovations paved the way for subsequent superhighways, such as I-44. It allowed them to blaze their own right-of-way instead of following the old trails and the lay of the land. This section was the first 4-lane opened on Route 66, and it was also the last to be closed. The log-sided buildings to our left across the 4-lane are on the site of a landmark Route 66 business in Pulaski County and on the road. The house was part of the main building of Sterling's Hillbilly Store. I told you about Wells Station, just down the road from the Hooker Church and Cemetery. Well, in September of 1945, a kerosene stove exploded, destroying the grocery store and two of the houses. The Wells family built a new store on the new 4-lane, managed by the oldest brother, Sterling. Just as well, because Hooker business on the original road was drying up, bypassed by the 4-lane. We will now make the right turn onto the 4-lane pavement, called the new road, and head west. Go through the cut and turn left at the first crossroads and the sign of historic 66 byway. Stop at the pullover in front of an empty white concrete building at mileage 3.6. Travel slowly and enjoy the pavement. See you at mile 3.6. Stop 8, mile 3.6. Here we are again. Look back across the 4-lane at the gravel road coming in this direction. That is the original Route 66 that we were on in Hooker. It has made the big wide turn around the end of the Hooker Ridge, which Hooker Cut just sliced through. The original route then turned south for a bit to go through Devil's Elbow. At this point, across the road at the tidy sided bungalow was Burgard's Sunset Rest Camp. It was built in the late 20s or early 30s. It offered groceries, gasoline, and several one-room log cabins for rent. Mrs. Burgard was also a Greyhound ticket agent. An arm on a pole was raised that signaled the bus to stop for passengers. Of course, there weren't passengers every day. That's why the signal. Mrs. Burgard also gave a home to lots of cats. If you look closely at the house, you will see the original stone fireplace and the long overhanging front roof that covered the